Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to one more class of Enterprise Application Integration. Today we are going to talk about message queues in a little bit more detail than what we've done until now. Although we've covered some parts of message queuing, the basic parts today we are going to see it in further detail. Before we start to delve into the message queues, there's a paper that I've uploaded to the website, and this paper is it's a required reading, and it's something that you should look into carefully, and it's actually quite connected to the previous class. And if you remember the previous class, it was about the two-phase commit protocol and distributed transactions. And as you remember, distributed transactions and the two-phase commit protocol have some problems, especially when you have parts of a transaction that take a lot of time, and especially if you have a human in the loop, it's problematic. And the funny thing about this article, it's actually quite short. It's 3 pages, I think. It was published in IEEE Software some years ago, is that basically it points out to a real-world example, which is a coffee shop. And the main point is that you don't actually use a two-phase commit protocol when you go to a coffee shop to buy coffee. And the author, Greg Hope, actually illustrates the point in some detail. Imagine if you use a two-phase commit protocol in a coffee shop, what that would mean is that you'd go to the cashier and you'd say, I want a coffee, and you'd give her the money, but you wouldn't let go of the money, and the cashier would also lock on the money, and then you'd ask the coffee and they would start to make the coffee. But, the money was there in place and they were making the coffee, and in a moment in time, at a certain time, everything would change hands. Well, if you go to Starbucks or to a coffee, a normal coffee, it doesn't really work that way, right? They make the coffee and they give you the coffee. Well, if you don't have a problem, they have a compensating action. They will make you wash dishes, or they will break your legs or something, but again, they don't do a two-phase commit protocol, right? And then you give them the money, and sometimes actually the person fixing the coffee, it's not the person to whom you are paying. And sometimes you actually don't have money and you go away and you pay on the next day. And there are ways to actually make sure that things go okay. So in a real system, in general, you organize the system in terms of business activities into something called conversations. Conversations are a set of activities that are joined together in a coherent set. And when things go wrong, you actually use some kind of compensating actions. And this paper is really neat because in 2 or 3 pages, it makes these points very, very clear. So I strongly recommend that you read it. It's an interesting and actually funny piece of information to read. So this is nothing new in terms of what you already know. We've talked a little bit about this, the client-server model and the problems normally associated with the client-server model. And the most important problem is that the client-server model is a synchronous model. So it's like having a phone, right? If I call Higino, basically Higino picks up, and both of us have to be there at the same time. If Higino doesn't pick up, well, we have a problem. If by any chance I drop the conversation in the middle, we have a problem, right? And this synchronous actually creates a lot of problems in terms of fault tolerance and creating a reliable system. Another problem is that the client-server model in general asks programmers to use a blocking model. What this means, and if you think about your programming experiences, is that when you do a remote procedure call, when you open a socket and call something, even if you are not using an RPC, in general, you are blocked until the other guy responds, right? In general, you don't continue on doing processing. And if you are designing scalable systems, performance systems, this actually creates a problem. Why? Because if you think of a server, and if a server is serving 5,000 connections a second or 10,000 connections a second, well, it has to keep all these resources in place at the same time, right? Because if it's talking with 10,000 clients at the same time, it needs 10,000 socket descriptors. It possibly needs 10,000 connections, right? It needs 10,000 threads. Well, it can be if it's naively implemented. So in general, if you are using client-server and a blocking model, you actually have to design extra layers of complexity in the software. So in general, use things like connection pools. So any of you who has programmed for a database, a scalable server that talks to a database, you know that you cannot create a single connection for every request that you receive. In general, you have an array or a data structure where you have a finite number of connections, and basically you reuse the connections because you don't want to be opening the connection, closing the connection every time that you make a request to the database. And that's really important, and in general, it's a source of performance bottlenecks. You know that if you are doing a scalable server, and we actually teach this in the operating systems course, in general, you are not going to create a thread for each one of the requests. This is the naive approach. So when people get a little bit more sophisticated, the first thing they do is to learn about thread pools. So in a thread pool, you have a fixed number of threads, and every time you have work to do, basically you give the work to a thread to perform. And basically, this is one of the first approaches that people use. When people learn more, they actually learn that this is actually a bad solution. So when you get even more sophisticated, you'll learn about things like asynchronous I/O and monitoring several connections at the same time and only being activated when you have activities in any of them. And believe me, in terms of programming model, this becomes really complicated because then you are managing all the state by hand and you don't even have isolation. You don't have the concept of thread. It's all implemented by hand, let's say. I can tell you that before, I think it was Java 1.4 came out, most people would say that Java is not really for enterprise computing and high-performance computing. And the reason for that, their argument was that Java didn't have interfaces for asynchronous I/O. And that was introduced, I think, in the version 1.4 of Java. And what that allows you to do is actually, in terms of middleware, in terms of application servers, to build high-performance servers. But again, that requires a lot of expertise. Another problem that you have is that if you have a synchronous model, let me close the door. If you have a synchronous model, actually coming up with a failure model and designing a system to tolerate failures, it becomes really difficult. And everybody who has developed an application using sockets or something like this, that does more than just grab a piece of information for the client, will realize that this becomes troublesome. So imagine that you are doing a bank transfer to some other place. If the approach is synchronous, if you lose a connection, you need to implement all the recovery protocols by hand. So imagine that you have a request here, Imagine that you have a request that is going to be invoked in a server, and actually this server has to invoke other servers getting a response to send a response back. So imagine what happens, something as simple as this message getting lost. What should you do? Do you time out and you try again? And is this going to be invoked again? Imagine that the problem was not this message getting lost, but actually one of these invocations getting lost. So the systems become actually quite difficult to design. Even when the infrastructure gives you some support, like sequencing of messages and filtering of duplicates, even so it's troublesome. Many people do it, and you should do it. It's useful in many cases, but in terms of enterprise computing, on many occasions you try to use other solutions that allow you to design the systems in a simpler way and a more reliable way. A possible solution for addressing these things, again, is using, for instance, a two-phase commit protocol, but as we've seen, doing a two-phase commit protocol is slow, and again, you need a lot of support from the client side and the server side to make it work properly. In fact, in general, what a two-phase commit protocol buys you is a variation of an exactly once semantic. So you are assured that once you've performed that invocation, if you commit it, that was executed exactly once. If you roll back, it wasn't executed. It's atomic. There are other problems, as you know, speed and scalability when using a synchronous model. The user in the loop. So again, if I'm doing a remote procedure call, and during that remote procedure call on the server side, someone has to approve the request, well, you cannot do it just by putting the user in the loop, because you'd block the client or the clients for a long time. In general, you need to have a coordinator, which means that it's an additional server to install, it's an additional piece of software to install, and it's not exactly the kind of things that you want to do in all occasions. Another thing that you need to realize, and this is a point that normally people don't think about and they forget, is that when you put several computers in place and several nodes, the probability of a failure dramatically increases, right? Let me give you an example. If you buy a computer at your home, the probability of the computer breaking down is not that high. In general, your computer operates without any problem for 2 or 3 years. Every time we buy a cluster here at the department where we buy 20 machines, well, in the next year there are 2-3 machines that break down. Why? The compound probability of each of the cluster as a whole of one of the machines crashing down, it's much higher. Okay? And what this means is that if you are designing a system where several nodes are involved, and for doing this kind of systems, you actually need to have several machines and several pieces of software, the more complex the system is, the higher the probability of a failure. Okay? Of course, more elements also imply that the system is harder to design, both in terms of software design and actually implementation. From a point of view of enterprise application integration, because you need to know which machines are available, which services are available, if you can use them or not, and what kind of policies are in place. And most of all, well, not most of all, but another important point is actually management. Nowadays, the biggest cost of having a system is not really the cost of the machines, is not the cost of operating, of buying the software. It's not the hardware nor the software. It's actually the maintenance cost, right? keeping the system upgraded, making sure that it's working, and so on and so forth. And this is quite easy to understand. A simple server machine nowadays costs about 2,000, 2,000 euros, 1,000, 2,000, an entry-level server. If you think about the salary of a system administrator per month, it's much larger, okay? What this means is that if you have to administer a lot of machines, you are actually spending a lot of money. I can tell you that one of the most recent trends on the last 5 years was to use virtualized environments, because it makes management much more easier, and you have savings in terms of space and in terms of energy. Okay, so what's the alternative that a lot of people, especially on back-end systems, use? They use something called message queues or message-oriented middleware. And the idea is that you have asynchronous interactions. What this means is that if I need something from Higino, I'm not going to call him using a phone. What I'm going to do is to send him a letter. And you know that when I send a letter, the recipient doesn't have to be present at that time. When I put a letter in the mail, so Carlos, can you give this to Higino? Well, Higino can be on a coffee shop or can be doing something else, and the message eventually gets delivered to Higino, okay? And I can even make sure that I get a receipt confirmation when the message is actually delivered. So the idea is that to try to address those kinds of problems, you decouple the sender of the message from the receiving of the message. And for that, you use a piece of middleware in the middle. You use queuing in the middle, okay? So when you use this kind of software, in general, you have a sender and a receiver. And in your application, you have an API which allows you to put a message in a queue, okay? And a queue is basically a buffer that knows how to route messages along systems. And in general, the queues can be made transactional. What this means is that when you send a message, either you were able to send it and it's stored in the message queue, or you get an error back, you get an exception. And basically the messages get routed throughout the network until the final destination, okay? So in a sense, it's like creating a post office service on the top of a normal network, and what you are doing is actually creating what's called an overlay network on top of your internet. Okay? Okay, two important concepts. The model follows a send and forget kind of approach. What this means is that once you put the message in a mailbox, in a queue, basically you send it and you can do whatever you need. Okay? So you forget between commas that you've sent a message, because you don't need to block in the meanwhile. And you also need, in terms of message queues, to have the message queues properly configured so that they store and they forward messages. What this means is that, for instance, in my example, if Higino is offline, then the message is stored in Carlos' queue. Basically, the queue will monitor Higino's until it becomes available, and then it will send the message. It's a little bit like sending email on the internet. You know that messages are queued until the final destination or the intermediate destinations are available. It's a form of message queuing, and that's why mail works so well. Okay? When the message gets to the final destination, to the final node, basically it's sent to the application on top. As I said, message queues can be transactional or non-transactional. What this means is that when you are implementing these systems, you have a primitive. Typically, you have a function call which is begin transaction. You generate a message. A message can be whatever you want. It can be an object. It can be an XML document. So let's call it doop to generate a message. And then you have a primitive to put the message in the message queue. Okay? And basically, when you commit, the message is either here or you get an exception. Okay? The same thing happens on the other side. So you can begin a transaction, you can get a message, and you can process the message. And finally, you commit. So when you commit, either the message is guaranteed out of the queue. Imagine that by any chance you get an exception in the meanwhile. So imagine that this process M throws an exception. If an exception is thrown, basically the system rolls back to the beginning of the transaction and the message is still in the message queue. Okay? So what is the guarantees that are given to you is that either the message is delivered to the queue or not, or you get an exception. And in the final part, basically, either the message is delivered to the application or basically you get an exception and the message is saved. Another important point is that because this is a transaction, actually you can put the sending and receiving of several messages inside a single transaction. So I don't need to put just one message, I can put several messages. And I can actually use several queues. Okay? Okay, so behind the scenes, if you look at the several implementations available, what's being done is that the two-phase commit protocol is still being used. It's the most widespread and useful protocol for doing these kind of things that you can have. The main difference in general is that you use the two-phase commit protocol between intermediate systems. So basically, between system A and the output queue, you have the two-phase commit protocol, and that guarantees you that the message was put on that queue. In this queue, in the first queue, the message is actually stored in stable storage. When you move the message between message queues, again, use a two-phase commit protocol that assures you that either the message is on the left-hand side or on the right-hand side message queue. Okay? It's also possible, if you want, to protect the whole system using a single transaction. Okay? But for that, you need a transaction coordinator. But again, that's possible, and it follows the patterns that we've seen before. So if you are using global transactions, basically each one of the participants has to join a coordinator and say, okay, I'm part of this transaction. If you use a two-phase commit protocol just between two end systems, it's true that you have a little bit of overhead, but in general, the overhead is not that high. In general, for most applications, it's acceptable. Because you don't have a lot of parties involved, you don't have to do locking in a lot of places, so in general, it's contained. Okay, questions so far? Pretty basic, right? These lights are driving me crazy. Okay, so another thing that all message queues support nowadays, well, almost all message queues, Microsoft don't support this, I think, is basically using a publisher-subscriber model. And what this allows you to do is actually to use multicasting of messages. What this means is a model of one-to-one kind of communication. So imagine that I want to send a message to several participants, or several participants are interested in a particular kind of message. So what I'm doing in this class is actually a multicast. You are all interested in my class, I hope. So you all came to my class, you registered in my class, and now I'm giving you a message. Okay?
Oh.
Yeah. you are not that interested in this class. Can you press the button?
Why doesn't Microsoft support this model? Do you know?
I'm not sure if they do or not. In the past, they didn't. I think one of the reasons is that they were one of the first proponents and supporters of message queuing, and actually they embed message queuing directly in the operating system. So even my Windows has a transactional message queuing system embedded in the operating system itself. And probably throughout the years they were able to use that model successfully. I don't know exactly why they didn't decide to also support publisher-subscriber, but as far as I know, they don't do that. But I may be wrong. I need to check, okay? Okay, but in Java, for instance, this is immediate. You have something called topics. Topics are message queues that can be subscribed by a number of entities, and every time a message arrives, all entities are notified that message is available. So how does this work in general? So imagine that you have a message queue, you have a process or application, and the first thing that this process says is, I want to subscribe message queue A, and every time I have a new message, I want the onNewMessage method to be called. And basically, you implement the onNewMessage method. So imagine a new message arrives, the method gets called, and inside that method's call, you have a primitive to get the message so that you can process it. If you have a second process that is also interested in that particular message queue, in that particular topic, it does exactly the same. It subscribes the message queue, and basically it implements a method where it has a primitive to get the message involved. Okay? Okay, so basically if you put a message there, the message is delivered to both queues. Okay?
When is the message in the message queue deleted?
Okay. So if you are not using a transactional system, the message is deleted as soon as it's delivered to all the participants. Okay? If you are using a transactional system, it's only deleted when the last one does a commit. So either everyone receives it or not. Okay?
So the message queue knows who's the subscriber.
Yeah. So when you do subscribe a certain message to subscribe to a certain message queue, you are actually subscribing with the message queue itself. Okay? So it's not a pooling approach. The message queue knows who you are, and it notifies you when a message arrives. Okay? Okay. So a little bit of nomenclature. When basically you have a channel between a unique sender and receiver that's called a point-to-point channel, when you have a system between one sender and several receivers, you have a multicast or a publisher-subscriber kind of approach. Okay? Another important thing. In this slide, I'm mixing two different concepts, and it's important that you realize that. This model where I say subscribe message queue A, and I want this method to be invoked when a message arrives, it's called asynchronous messaging. Okay? What this means is that I can be doing whatever I want inside my application, but when a message arrives, it's like a signal that makes this method to be invoked. And that's called asynchronous messaging. Microsoft, for instance, supports asynchronous messaging. Another thing is to do a multicast. A multicast is basically making sure that a message from a message queue is delivered to several parties. Okay? So imagine, if this was a multicast channel, and I was not using asynchronous messaging, I could do something as simple as M, that get message, to actually get the message. And this guy would do the same, M get message, and the message would be deleted after both had received the message, okay? So it's two different things. Asynchronous messaging is register with a channel, and I'll be called whenever a new message arrives. Multicasting is the ability to deliver the message to several parties at the same time, okay? Okay, some advantages, disadvantages. This is not black and white, it's highly debatable in a sense. But in general, one of the advantages of doing asynchronous interactions is that in general it's easier to develop modular components. Why? Because all communication is through message queues, and basically you have a proper interface where messages arrive and are sent, and in general you partition the systems much better. Of course, if you are a good programmer, you can also do that using synchronous messaging. It's a matter of proper design, let's say. But in general, systems that are based on message queues are typically more modular and more thought to be used in terms of modules. In terms of programming model, in general, it's not hard. It's kind of easy. Why? Because what I'm dealing with is messages, so it's strings of text or objects, and basically I'm able to send and receive messages very easily. It's also a lot easier, and this is not a matter of taste. In general, it is a lot easier to handle failures because the transactional part is embedded in the system itself, and there is support in terms of stable storage, there is queuing of messages automatically, I don't have to have both parties available at the same time, and so on. And over the years, especially on financial services and banking services, this has been used to develop some pretty complex systems that in general operated in an autonomous way. It naturally supports transactions and relaxing isolation because it's a primitive itself, and it's quite easy to understand that between starting a transaction, getting a message, and committing, either the message is at one place or not. And in general, it's quite easy to design systems to be scalable. Why? Because I'm decoupling the senders from the receivers. What this means is that if I need more processing power to send messages or route messages, because a message queue is just a name, I have location transparency, which means that I can actually put more machines in the middle, and I can very easily scale the communication infrastructure. And in general, this doesn't happen with client-server approaches. Why? Because when you connect to a server, it's actually that server, and the server is there, and it has to be there. If I'm doing messaging, well, it can be that server, but I can route the next message to the server next to it, and I can do this very transparently. And if I'm having problems in terms of processing the messages, because a lot of messages are arriving, well, I can process them a little bit slower, and I can actually queue the messages. And this is not a problem because the sender and the receiver are decoupled, okay? Disadvantages. In general, it's slower than RPCs. Why? Because I have a little bit more overhead regarding the two-phase commit protocol if I'm using it. In general, I do use persistence to store messages, and I can have intermediate loops, although people tend not to use a lot of loops. but it can be somewhat slower than RPCs. In many systems, this is not really an issue. Another disadvantage is that, in general, programmers don't know about message queuing and are not so familiar with the model. How many of you have used message queuing? 1, 2, 3. Okay, the guys with a little bit more industrial experience. So if I ask any of you, how many of you have used sockets or RPCs? Probably, yeah, most of the people have done it. So in general, it takes a little bit of convincing to say, okay, in this situation, you should use message queuing, and people say, oh, but aren't the APIs somewhat complicated? Well, they are not that complicated, but the model is not that useful. Another disadvantage, although this depends highly on the infrastructure that you are using, is that in many systems, or in some systems, you don't have data typing nor an intermediate language to define what's being sent. What this means is that from the point of view of a message queue, you can send whatever you want. It's basically a bulb of data, a binary large object, right? So it may be XML, it may be a string, it may be a number. For the message queue, it's the same. Having said that, some implementations and some systems do allow typing of data, and you can actually say, this message queue is associated to this particular type, and you can do type checking. But again, it's not a familiar feature. Okay? Okay. Some other important points. You know how software vendors are, right? They need to sell you stuff. So, in the beginning, message queuing was basically what I've presented you. You could send and receive messages, you had persistence of messages, and you had two-phase commits. Nowadays, every single vendor of message queuing supports some kind of advanced functionality. So, in general, you can configure a message queue or several message queues, and the message queues are able to do, for instance, filtering based on ID or content of messages. They are able to do transformation of messages. So if a message with a certain format appears in the message queue, it's able to transform it into something else. Priorities, like some messages have more priority than others, comparison among messages, and so on. And of course, when you have a functionality like this is not just normal message queuing. What you have is what's called a message broker in the middle. And many message brokers are available. And this is very nice and very, very useful if you are designing a small system. And now the problem is this. If you are designing a small system, these functionalities are very tempting and very useful, and indeed they are, and people start to use them. The problem is that, imagine that you have a large system, a large-scale system, and you have part of the deployment in this department, part of the deployment in a different department, and you have message queues associated to both departments, and now you start to do filtering, you start to do transformation in all these message queues. What happens in many situations is that after a while, you have all this infrastructure deployed, and people don't really understand what's going on, and people don't really understand what kind of rules are deployed in each one of the message queues, because you are not doing a more centralized or visible kind of method of management. So in general, you should be really careful about this. And my advice, and what people normally tell you, is that if you need this kind of functionality, it's much better to use a process orchestrator. not necessarily a Beeple process orchestrator. You can have orchestrators for message queues, than to actually configure the physical message queues to do this stuff. Okay? So if you remember the book, the Enterprise Integration Patterns book, the use case and the study that we did was all around message queues, and the communication between the systems were based on message queues. And in general, if you have a process manager, a process orchestrator, you can actually define what you want to happen in terms of publisher-subscriber channels, in terms of point-to-point channels, and so on and so forth. Okay? And many of these systems are actually able to deploy and configure the message queues in a distributed fashion. So, in a nutshell, be really careful if you configure low-level message queues instead of having a higher-level vision of what's going on in the system, because from a maintenance point of view, from a management point of view, it's going to be a nightmare after a while. Okay, availability. There are tons of message queuing solutions. Almost any enterprise system supports this. I can tell you that since Windows 2000, XP, Vista, now Windows 7, Windows Server, all the Microsoft Windows application servers support directly in the operating system message queuing, so you can use it off the shelf. You have a product by Oracle called AP that is basically a message broker. In Java, the standard is called GMS, Java Messaging System. And Java Messaging System is basically a set of interfaces, is an abstraction for message queuing, which is implemented by several vendors. So IBM WebSphere implements GMS, BioWebLogic that was bought implemented JMS, JBoss has JBoss messaging, the Sun Java Application Server and Glassfish support JMS. If you go to banks, probably you will see IBM MQ series. That's probably one of the most deployed infrastructures in banks. TIBCO is very common. Vitria, Web Methods. There's a ton of these guys in the market. Okay? Okay, questions so far? No questions? Okay, let's see some code because we like code. And because Carlos, yeah, Carlos.
What I saw
In some banks, for example, the use of TIBCO, it's not some message queue, some simple thing. It has a whole department working for it, producing code.
Yeah. Again, I'm teaching you about the basic technologies, and even in terms of TIBCO, TIBCO has a lot of products, and they have these enterprise frameworks that you use to deploy these systems. Again, I don't know exactly what scenario you saw, but again, TIBCO has a lot of solutions that work in an integrated way. So you have solutions for doing message queuing, you have solutions for doing complex event processing. They have something called the Power of Now. You have solutions for helping with the data warehousing process. So again, you have a lot of infrastructure to put in place to solve particular problems that you may have. Okay. Okay, so let's look at some practical examples just for you to get an idea of this. And I'm going to do this because since it's not a so familiar model, it's actually useful to look at some code. And because Carlos was always complaining about Java this and Java that, and João also, I'm going to show you this in .NET and in Windows because again the concepts are the same and we can do this in any number of platforms. Okay, so the first simple scenario that we are going to do, it's quite simple. We are going to have two processes. I'm going to call them ping and pong. I'm going to create two message queues that are going to decouple ping and pong. And what I'm going to do is basically send a message saying ping with a number. This message is going to be routed through this message box and sent to this process. This process is going to take the message, replace ping by pong, add 1 to the number that it receives, and send it back to ping. Okay? And this will go on like this. Very simple example. The message that I'm going to send is this structure here, which is basically a struct which has a string and a value. Okay? So let's look at this. So the first thing is to know where the message queuing of Windows is. So if you go to Administrative Tools and Services, Administrative Tools, Computer Management, and if you go to Services and Applications, you will see that you have something called message queuing. Okay? I'm going to turn off the lights a little bit. So you see that you have outgoing queues. This is normally used to send messages to other machines, private queues that are normally using in the same machine, and system queues that are actually in general used by Windows. Okay? So let's do something very simple. Let's create a new message queue, and I'm going to call it, I need to check the code because I don't remember anymore. Okay, I'm going to call it ping inbox. Okay? So new message queue, ping inbox. Notice that there is a tab that says transactional, but in this case I don't want to use transactional queues. So I create a message queue. It's called ping inbox. And now I'm going to create a new message queue that I'm going to call pong inbox. Okay? So basically I have these two message queues. So let's look at the code of ping and pong. Okay, this is a very simple application. The structure simple message is what I'm going to send. It has a string and a value. And I have a constructor to make it easier to write the code. And I have a method that allows me to print out the contents of a message. Okay? Okay. In my application, I'm going to use a message queue called inbox and a message queue called outbox. Let's look at Pong first, because it's easier. So, what I'm doing here... damn it. Sorry. So what I'm doing here is creating a new reference to a message queue which has the name private ping inbox. And this was created by the administrator or configured by a system deployer. And this line that looks a little bit complicated, I don't want you to understand it in detail, but suffices to say that what I'm stating here is that I want this data type, this simple message, to actually be sent and received as an XML message, okay? And in .NET you have these adapter classes that if he sees the data types of .NET, is automatically able to generate XML and vice versa, okay? But again, you could send raw data, you could receive raw data, you could do whatever you want. But this automatically generates XML and formats everything as XML. So I have a reference for an inbox, I have a reference for an outbox. Okay? So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to be in a loop. I'm going to receive a message from the inbox. This message is called R. And now I'm going to create a response. This is the message itself. And the message contains a lot of data. It contains not only the payload. The payload is actually the simple message with the string and the value. But it also contains information like the sender, the receiver, the timestamp, the correlation ID, and a lot of boilerplate information that you may need. So the way that you get the payload from your message is actually to use a property called body. So I've received the message, and now given the message, I'm going to retrieve the body. And I'm going to cast this body to simple message. Okay?
You're doing it synchronous, right? When you do the receive, you wait for the message, or
I block until I receive the message. But that's not. It's synchronous between my end application and the message queue. It's not synchronous between the end application and the other end application, the ping and the pong. Okay? But that makes a big difference, even in terms of fault tolerance and the way I have to design the system. Okay? So I print out the message to the screen, and now I get the value, and the value is basically the content of the message value plus 1. And now I'm going to create a new message. The payload is a simple message whose content is Pong, containing the value that I received incremented by 1. And now what I do is basically use this reference outbox to the ping inbox to send my message. Okay? So I'm constantly doing this loop. What I do in the ping, it's exactly the opposite, right? I have an inbox, which is the message queue. I have the outbox. And basically the ping creates a new message saying ping. It has a value. I send a message. I sleep for 1 second. And now I see if I received something. If I did, I print out the message. I increment the value. And I start over. Okay? So what I have is a ping pong between two different applications.
Blocks too. Ping blocks too.
It blocks on the message queue. Okay? So as I told you, there is a difference between blocking calls and asynchronous.
I think we lost sound on this side, Paulo.
Can you hear me?
Yep,
this
perfect.
is amazing. This microphone was the worst investment that we did until today. It's really incredible. It burns a battery per class. Unbelievable.
I think it's just for your classes, though. Everyone else, it seems to last weeks.
Yeah. I talk too much. Okay, so going back to this example, this get call to receive the message it's a blocking call, okay? So this application blocks until there is a message for it in this message queue, okay? The other alternative, it's using what's called asynchronous messaging. And in asynchronous messaging, you subscribe to the message queue and you can continue working, okay? But when a new message arrives, your method gets invoked, okay? The main difference between a traditional client-server kind of approach is that in a client-server approach, you are basically blocked until this guy receives the message, processes something, and sends you a reply. In this case, that doesn't happen. This is a little bit like sending a letter, okay? And getting is a little bit going to your mail to see if something is there. Or wait by the mail until something is there. Okay. So let's get back to the code. I have the ping, creating a message, sending a message, sleeping 1 second, receiving a message, printing it out, and doing it again. And the pong is the reverse. So let me make sure it's compiled. It's compiled. So ping pong minus pong blocks. So it's waiting for ping. It didn't crash just because ping is not executing. It's basically sitting there waiting. And now I'm going to do ping. Okay? And notice that if I abort, let's imagine that I abort one of these guys. Well, the system doesn't crash. If I restart it, everything continues. Okay? Very simple example, very simple application. Let me show you something. In this simple application, I'm sending a message and I'm sleeping for 1 second. So if I abort the application, either the Pong didn't receive the message and it stays in the message queue, or it received the message, but Pong is so fast that it sends a message again. So there will almost always be a message left on the message queue. And if you look at it, look at this. Ping inbox has a message in there. Let's look at it. So ping inbox, queued messages. Oh, there's a message. So even the system administrator can look at what's going on. So if you look at this, a message has a label. I didn't fill the label. It has an ID. I can give it an ID myself, or I can let the system generate an ID for it. It has a priority, a class. It has the time it was sent, a time it arrived at the message queue. It has the possibility of being tracked to see where it was all in the system. Look at the queues. There is a reference to the recipient, so it's saying this message should be sent directly to an operating system which is sitting on a machine called Orion, and the queue it's called private ping inbox, okay? And the destination is this one, okay? It has a sender. The sender has an identifier. There is a name for the path involved. I didn't use any, but I could have configured the sender. The messages can be authenticated, so there is support for security, including hashing. It could actually be encrypted. I didn't do encryption. And I can actually look at the body. And if you look at the body, on the right-hand side, you see that what's being sent in the wire is actually XML. So let me show you what's being sent. This is the content being sent, okay? So it's a simple message, okay? The field is MSG, the payload is ping, and the value is 10, okay? And basically .NET is taking care of the serialization and the serialization for me automatically, okay? And all this security in messages, encryption, reliability is available off-shelf if you use messaging for this, okay?
Just out of curiosity, can you create message queues in runtime on Windows?
You can.
Okay. Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, you can actually. I'm not doing that, but you can. And in general, I don't advise you to do it. If you are programming a large-scale application, message queues are a little bit like mailboxes. It's something that you want to configure, especially if later on you want to have routing of messages or doing some more complex processing. Okay? For instance, imagine that it's not here anymore. But remember there was primitives like the wiretap that allow you to listen on a message queue and store it in a database and do things like that. If you are creating message queues programmatically, well, then it becomes really difficult to introduce these components and make the system extensible and modifiable in the future, right? If you do things in a configuration kind of way, it's a lot easier to extend the system. So in general, for large-scale systems, you shouldn't be creating the message queues from inside the application, okay? It should be something configured. Okay, so let me show you a couple of other things. Okay, so in this case, the ping inbox and the pong inbox and the ping inbox are actually hard-coded on Pong, right? But imagine that you want Pong to respond to any message that comes from anyone that sends him a ping message. You couldn't do it with this code, right? So let's look at a slightly different example. So let's look at Pong, okay? And now imagine that you want Pong to respond not to the inbox of ping, but actually to whoever sent him the message. You can do this very, very easily. Why? Because if you receive a message, inside of a message, you also have a property which is the response queue. And the response queue is like the address of the people that sent you a letter. Whenever you need to respond to a girlfriend or a boyfriend that sent you a letter, you just need to go to the recipient and copy the address. So it's the same thing here. You have the response queue inside of a message, and if you do message.responseQueue send the message that you created, it's going to be sent automatically to whoever sent you the message, okay? And of course, this implies, like in a letter, that when you write the letter, you don't put just the recipient, but who actually wrote the letter. And how do you do this? It's very easy. Whenever you are sending a message, basically you have a property in the message called response queue, and basically you configure it with your response address, right? So the ping is saying, hey, listen guy, to respond to me, use my inbox. And the Pong, what he's doing is basically saying, I'm going to send this to the response queue that was configured, and I'm going to send him a message. Okay? So let's see this executing. Okay. Let me just sure. I'm going to purge this message queue because if I don't, it's going to be a big mess. And I don't want big messes. So this will be Pong, and this will be ping. So you see, it's still working. Okay, I'm going to stop this. This was Pong. Look at the content of a message. It has a timestamp. It has an ID. It has something called a correlation ID that we will see in a moment. And now it has something called reply to. And the reply to says reply to this queue. Okay? And you can even see at what time the message was sent and the contents. Okay? And basically you are replying to the guy that sent you the message. Does any of you remember what's a correlation ID? We've seen this probably on the second or third class of this year. Correlation ID. It's very, very important. Exactly. So imagine let me open the slides of that class just for you to remember.
Paulo, while you're doing that, is it possible to have multiple senders submit to a single queue, or do they each have to have their own queue?
Sure, you can have any number of senders sending to one queue. So again, the queue is a little bit like a post office. Basically, you put messages, you put letters in a post office, and any number of people can put messages on the same post office, and any number of people can receive messages from that post office.
So if you have multiple senders and you put something in a reply queue, do all of the senders get that, or does that only go to the one who actually sent the message?
It only goes to one, because the message only has. So you configure the response queue in the message itself, not on the message queue.
Okay.
So if you look at the code, I'm saying message.response queue equals inbox. So the configuration is at the message level, not at the queue level.
Okay.
Okay? So if you remember the first class, okay. If you remember the first class, you remember that I needed to check if a certain item we needed to check if a certain item was available in the inventory, and I needed to check if a client had money, which meant that basically I had a publisher-subscriber channel, and this channel was subscribed by two different departments, right? So that meant that a message was being delivered to these two departments. But later on, I needed to have a component called an aggregator, and I needed to generate a message that would say if the guy had money, and at the same time if I had the item. And the question was, if I'm doing 10,000 messages a second here and here, how can I join them in a proper way? How do I know to which original order they belong to? And that's what a correlation ID is needed for. So every time I break a message in several, and I need to join them again, in many, many occasions, I need to have a number that relates these several orders to just one. Okay? And that's a correlation ID. A correlation ID is a number that I can use to correlate a message to an entity, to an actor, to a message, to whatever. It can be anything that I want. Okay? So in this case, in the case of my example, I'm using the correlation ID for a very simple thing. So in this example, imagine that you have 10 pings sending messages, okay? The Pong is going to respond to the inbox queue. But because Pong is a nice guy, he's going to send this Pong message is actually correlated to this message that you sent me. And the guy that received it can actually see, oh, you are sending me a response to this one. Okay? And what that allows you to do is that, imagine that you have several clients entering orders, and you have several of these guys processing orders. When this guy responded, you could actually have this guy correlating what he sent with what it received. Okay? So let's look at how this is done. So the ping is the normal ping. What I'm going to do in Pong is to say, I'm receiving the message, but now in my response that I'm creating, I'm configuring a field called correlation ID with the ID of the original message. And now I'm going to send it. Okay? And when I execute, you can see, for instance, that bless you.
Thank you.
You can see that, for instance, that this message that this guy received, message 198, was actually the response to message 197. Okay? Which is here. So basically this allows you to track messages from one side to the other side. Of course, the way you design your correlation IDs is up to you. If you do a mess, you do a mess. Okay? Hopefully you don't do a mess. So there's still a message here, and I don't want this. So Pong inbox, queued messages. Okay, doesn't matter. Okay, so so we've seen this example correlation of messages and response queue. Asynchronous messages. That's the third example. Very quickly, imagine that I don't want to be blocked waiting for a message, right? So imagine that I have my Pong method but the Pong method will be doing something while a message doesn't arrive, okay? And what I want to do is that whenever a message arrives, I want onNewMessage to be called. How do I do this? It's very simple. I don't know how many of you know .NET, but in .NET there is a concept called a delegate. And a delegate is a method that I register, and I want it to be invoked whenever something happens, okay? So what I need to do is that I create my inbox called Pong inbox. And now I say, whenever there is a receive, whenever there is a message arriving, I want this method called onNewMessage, which is here to be called. And then I must say, I'm ready to start receiving messages. So on my inbox, I basically call begin receive. And after this, I'm basically going to execute a while loop, and I'm going to be sleeping for 5 seconds, and I will print out, I'm sleeping, I'm doing something else, I'm doing something else, I'm doing something else. So let's see what happens. So
Sorry, what means region and region?
I can tell you.
The beauty of C.
Oh, I have a Microsoft guy in the audience. Come on. What I am debug. Okay, let's call Pong. Look what happens. I'm doing something else. I'm basically sleeping. I'm doing something else. I'm sleeping. Doing something else, right? Now, if I call the ping method, see? Every time this guy sends a message, the method on this side gets invoked. Of course, the doing something else continues to execute even so. Right? So, before I tell you what that means, let's look at onNewMessage. onNewMessage, what it has to do is to end the receiving of the message, which began actually in this method. Okay? So it does end receive under the result that was passed as parameter. And now it's exactly the same. I get the body of the message, I print it out, and the final thing I need to do is to start the receive again. Can someone tell me why this is needed? Or why do you think it's needed that I do a receive? Experience programming in Unix? Come on, operating system.
To signal the.
Go ahead.
To signal the waiting queue, maybe.
More or less. Okay, can you press the button again?
You need to register the signal.
But why? Why do I need to do that? What's the big deal? Okay, imagine that you get 2 messages in a row. So imagine that I'm doing something, I get an asynchronous message, and this gets invoked. Meanwhile, a new message arrives. Do you think it's reasonable that this gets invoked again? This was what happened many years ago in Unix and Linux. It was called unreliable signaling, and it created a mess in terms of implementation because it meant that I needed to do my functions so that they were reentrant. They could be called several times in a row, and it was really difficult to control. So what the system does is something very simple. Basically, if this gets invoked, it's only invoked for the first message. And until I do begin receive again, all the other messages are queued. This means that I don't have to worry about making this reentrant. Okay? It means that I don't have to do any kind of synchronization inside of my method body. Okay? Okay. Asynchronous messaging, very easy in .NET, very, very simple. This region keyword is a nice thing about .NET. What it allows me to do is basically collapse whole regions of code. So if I say begin region and end region, when I press this button here, I have something, a comment saying asynchronous Pong with all the code inside. Okay? It's a neat feature and useful. For instance, I have this part, this main ping pong program, and this is also a region of code where I have a class and several methods. Okay? So in the end, my program looks a little bit like this. Okay. Final example before we leave. Transactional queues, okay? Using transactions. And this is really one of the neat things in .NET and messaging, because you can use transactions off the shelf without any kind of, well, without many problems. So let's create a new message box. Transactional ping inbox. I'm going to make it transactional. Transactional Pong inbox. Okay? Very simple. And I hope I didn't get the names wrong. So let me open the example with transactions. Let's look at ping. No, let's look at Pong. It's easier. So this is going to be a transactional ping pong. And it's going to be, well, let's look at ping before, not Pong. Okay. Let me check. Non-transactional, you are right. Okay, so let's compile this. It's compiled. What ping is going to do is very simple. I have a class called MessageQueueTransaction. I'm creating a transaction. So this single line, what it does is to register with the transactional coordinator, which in this case is actually Windows. I begin a transaction, so transaction begin. I put a ping message in the message queue. I send it, and it becomes visible when I commit it. Okay? I'm going to sleep 1 second. I'm going to begin a new transaction. I'm going to take something out of the queue. I'm going to print it out, and I'm going to commit it. Once I commit, the message disappears from the message queue. Okay? Very simple to use transactions in this case. Let's look at Pong. Pong does something very simple and useful to illustrate this point. I'm creating a transaction and beginning the transaction. I'm going to wait for a message. I receive it. and I'm going to print it out. I'm going to create a response, and I'm going to send it. And now I'm going to do something funny. I'm going to write to the screen, do you want to commit or do you want to abort the transaction? And if the user responds commit, I'm going to commit it. If I respond abort, I abort it. What do you think it happens if I call abort? Am I going to receive the same message again? Am I going to receive the next message? The same message, right? It's like I never took the message out of the message queue. It's like I have never sent the message to the message queue, right? So let's see this executing. This is almost Unix, but not really. Clear doesn't work. Okay, so this guy is waiting for a message. Again, I'm using transactional message queues. And now I'm going to call ping. Okay, this guy sent the message and it committed. And now this guy is saying, I'm waiting for a message, I got ping, I've sent the message, I'm not yet committed, what do you want to do? Do you want to commit or abort? What do you prefer to do? Commit. Let's commit. So if I commit, this guy down here, look at it. It received the 1 and it sent a message with 2. What this guy is doing now is sending what? 3. If I abort, what do you think it happens? It receives 2 again and it sends us 3. Will this guy ever see the 3 if I abort it? No. So let's do it. Abort. I got exactly the same message. Nothing appeared on this side. Abort. Abort. You see? Nothing happens. If I commit, everything becomes visible. You see the transactions are isolated. It becomes visible. And I receive the message down here. Okay? Look at this. Even if I do Control-C and I abort the application, what's going to happen? It was rolled back. So if I execute again, I'm at the same place. Isn't it cool? Okay. Now let me do a funny thing. First of all, let me check. Let me clear this Pong inbox. This is really a powerful mechanism. I love message queuing. Okay. So let me ask you something. I was expecting a question that you didn't ask. So let's look at ping. Why did I do a commit here and then I started a transaction here? Why didn't I just do commit? So begin transaction, do all this stuff, commit. Why didn't I do this? What?
Two transactions, one where you receive the message and the other where you send it.
But why can't I have just one transaction? So imagine, begin transaction and at the same time I want to send a message, sleep for a while, receive the response and commit. Not roll back. Exactly! I have a distributed deadlock. The kind of things that you learn in distributed systems, that's what I'm creating here. Why? Because I can only get a response if the Pong receives the message. But Pong can only get the message if I actually commit the transaction. So this message is not going into the message queue because I don't have a commit, which means that the other guy doesn't see it, which means that I cannot receive it. So if I actually execute this code, ta-da, everything is stopped. Distributed deadlock along the several nodes of my system. Okay? Oh, damn. Damn it. I need to compile this stuff. And now the other guy is executing. Okay, I've compiled. Now I need to delete this guy. Okay. Distributed deadlock. Okay? And I'm not lying to you. It's really a distributed deadlock. By the way, this can also happen in a database. Sometimes you have deadlocks, and most modern databases detect the deadlocks and they abort the transactions. And sometimes you get some nasty messages saying transaction aborted, and it doesn't restart the transaction. But that's a different story. Okay, so again, when designing a distributed system, even with transactions and so on, it's easy to create a distributed deadlock. The only thing that you need for that to happen is basically to have a loop somewhere in your nodes. And again, if you don't have flat transactions, do you remember flat transactions? If you don't do it flat, it's a lot easier for this to happen. Okay, ping pong. Okay, so this is an example these were just a couple of examples in .NET using Microsoft Windows message queues, just because of Carlos and João. You can do exactly the same thing in Java. The APIs are very similar in JMS. An additional functionality that you actually have is something called topics. Topics implement the publisher-subscriber model, where for a message queue you can have several receivers. One thing you have to be careful about is interoperability. Off-the-shelf, Microsoft Message Queue doesn't talk with JMS. I can tell you that nowadays there are bridges to actually exchange messages between systems. The same thing happens with, for instance, IBM MQ series, TIBCO, and so on. The good news is that in general, most vendors nowadays actually implement bindings for JMS. So JMS has become actually the lingua franca of message queuing. To know more, this is really a great book. I love this book. It has a lot of information about message queuing. So if you are designing large-scale systems that are based on message queuing, this is the reference to go. And actually, it's the whole book, because it's based on messaging. Most important chapters, for those who have actually read some of the chapters, you know that the chapters are actually very small. There are a huge number of chapters, but very small. These chapters actually contain the basics about the APIs and the kind of concerns that you have to have when designing this kind of systems. So, questions? No questions? By the way, your last assignment, for those of you doing the last assignment, is actually going to be about message queues. And in general, I'd say it's probably the simplest assignment of the whole semester, because using message queues is in general quite easy. But that will be published after you finish the current ongoing assignment. Okay? Any questions? No questions? Let's go.
Yeah, I have a question.
Oh, okay.
When will the fourth assignment be published?
On the day that the third assignment is submitted.
Would we have time to finish it before our...
We're not doing the fourth assignment.
You are not required to do it. So for you, the grading is based on the results of the 3 assignments. Okay? In any case, because the topic is so important, I would advise you to at least browse the documentation and actually look at it, because even if you want to talk to an employer, or if you go to an interview, if you know something about these topics, it's quite useful. Okay? Okay, guys. See you next Friday.